Hello, my name is Jenny Lynn and I'm with KMVT15. Today I have the privilege of interviewing Mr. Don McDonald, who is a museum historian and who will speak to us about the Copeland Building, which has been designated as a historical landmark in the city of Los Altos. Mr. McDonald, could you please tell us when this landmark was built and by whom?
Yes, it was built in 1911. It was the fourth building to be built in downtown Los Altos, which just started 3 years earlier. And it was built by Haley Copeland. And that's where the name Copeland Building comes from. And he actually had a background in newspaper business, but he came here, he wanted to open a store, which he did in that building.
Okay, so why do you think the city chose to make it a landmark? And could you also tell us where it's located so that our viewers can identify it?
Yes, if you come down the expressway into Los Altos and turn left, there's a service station on the right, and then across First Street is this two-story building, which is the Copeland Building. And it's one of the reasons it's historical is that we still have it. So many of the old buildings have gone, but this building, 1911, still there and still in use. It's been used for almost 100 years.
Wow, 100 years.
Almost.
Jeez. I read that the Copeland family operated a post office, a drugstore, and a candy store with a fountain. Could you tell us what you know about the businesses that they operated there? I know you've mentioned them briefly before.
Yes, well, Aura Copeland, his wife, she became the postmistress when the post office moved there. So that was the post office end of the business. He ran the soda fountain and the drugstore, and he hired a pharmacist. And in time, as other businesses came, they would bring their own people, but that was his main business, was the drugstore.
Oh, it was. Fascinating, isn't it?
Yes, well, it was, in those days, you consider how small Los Altos was. It was the first drugstore, for one thing. You have to have a post office, so it was a post office, and it became a sort of a meeting place for people, sort of a civic gathering place, because in those days, Los Altos itself was not incorporated. Wasn't incorporated for another till 52. So it was just a real estate place on the map. In the downtown area, they originally called Los Altos was only perhaps 200 lots, and then the downtown section, what we call the downtown triangle. So probably at the time that this building was built, it drew on a population of maybe up to 1,000 in the whole area. But Los Altos itself was very small.
Okay. So could you share some more about us, some more about what you know of the Copeland family and where they lived? I know that this was their building. Did they live in this building?
They did live upstairs, and then when they sold the building, they moved to a place over on Hawthorne, a house that they built there. But Haley, he wasn't in very good health, and he wanted to get back to the newspaper business. So he put the place up for sale in 1923. It's 12 years after he had started it. And it's the next owner who we think of in connection with the building, because he was such a colorful character, and the place really became the civic center and the social center of the town.
Really? Who was the colorful person?
The colorful person?
Was Mr. Copeland?
No, it was Mr. Gregory. Jack Gregory. I mentioned the barber shop. They needed a barber, of course.
Yes.
And Jack was born in England. He came from a big family in Liverpool. And he was in World War I. He learned barbering at 12, so kids went to work at those days real early. Anyway, he was in the British Army in Egypt during the war.
Yeah.
His dream was to come to America. And so he finally got here and ended up finally in Half Moon Bay. And when he was in Half Moon Bay, somebody mentioned that there was an opening for a barber in Los Santos, across the mountains. So he came over. This was in 12, 23. This was in 23. Just before, actually it was in 22. He came over and he became the barber in that building.
Okay.
And he was such a successful barber, had a great personality apparently, that the bank was willing to loan him money to build his own barber shop across Main Street, which he did and moved into. And then when Copeland decided to sell, Jack got in cahoots with Paul Schaup's son, Jack Schaup, and Paul put up the money and they bought the building from Copeland. That was in 23. And the next 13 years, it was the Gregory place, and they named the J&S for the Schaup, G&S, I think.
Okay.
G&S, Gregory and Schaup drugstore.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you about Mr. Gregory because I read somewhere about him, so I'm really happy to hear how he entered the picture.
Well, he also, one of his friends turned out to be the family of later Senator Cranston. And at one of his parties, he met this young girl, Charlotte, and fell in love, and they got married. So he picked up a wife here, and by the time he was ready to, I think he was married in 24, just after he had moved to the other barbershop. But anyway, she was delighted to be part of this new enterprise when he bought the building. And that's when he decided to make some changes to the building. The building upstairs had 8 rooms and a center room. I don't quite know how it was laid out because I've never been up there. But what Copeland had apparently rented it out to roomers in those days. But Jack brought his family over from Liverpool. He brought his father, and he brought over 6 brothers and a couple of sisters, and they all pretty much filled up the upstairs of the building. So that took care of that. And then he had a lot of workforce to help run the place, and he opened a new section to the building for dry goods. And that's...
He must have been doing very well because back then, I would imagine it was a completely different, time, and to be able to bring your family over from England.
Yes, well, he apparently was pretty good with money. His wife turned out to be quite an asset too. She became friends with Thelma Fulbright, had opened a beauty salon a couple doors down Main Street. And her son, her brother, George, apparently was a master artist with women's hair. So he would attract these women, actually some of them from Hollywood. The early days of, I don't know whether you even remember Ginger Rogers, but
yes, I do.
Some of the early movie stars, as they were just beginning, would come there and have their hair done, and then they'd go to the G&S store and buy stuff and hang out. So that helped make it a very colorful scene.
They came all the way from Los Angeles up here?
Well,
sorry.
That's a good question. I don't know why. Ginger Rogers had a friend here, and that's what brought her. But
Oh, okay.
I don't know about the others.
Okay.
Maureen O'Sullivan and some of that ilk. I don't remember all their names, but they were female movie stars. They had to have their hair just right. Why they came here, I don't know. But it's San Francisco, probably.
Right, and I think back they had Hearst Castle, and Mr. Hearst had a lot of movie stars coming over to his place. So I can't imagine that Los Altos was such a far shot from there. So
Well, it was on the railroad, which of course helped.
right, it's just so fascinating to me. I'm really fascinated with that era, and so to hear all of this is such a privilege. So I read also that Mr. Copeland republished the Los Altos Star, which was the first local newspaper.
Well, actually, there were several newspapers published before he got into it, but they weren't, they were really advertising journals. They were newspapers, but they were given out free as an incentive to come and move to Los Altos. So they had the appearance of a newspaper, but they weren't in fact a newspaper. And then after he sold the building, then he did start the Star. But there had been an earlier Star and earlier other newspapers that had been published, but he's the one that first started right away, 23, he started the Star. And he ran it until 5 years, until 38, and then I guess he hadn't been in very good health and he had to give it up. And so that was the end of the Star. And then the next newspaper that came along was in 1931 was the Los Altos News.
Okay.
And it stopped during the Depression, but back in 38 it had a good run. It ran up until 64. That was the big newspaper until the Town Crier came along in 47, and for several years they overlapped, and then gradually the Town Crier became the paper, and that's our paper today.
Really? That paper's been around that long?
Well, yeah, 47.
I'm sure it's changed owners over the years though, right?
Oh yes, lots of changes.
Like everything else in life.
Exactly.
I know that the Copeland building also housed a theater.
Yes, well, it's interesting. In 1927, Jack said, you know, we should have a movie theater. There isn't one in town. They were occasionally showing films in the grammar school auditorium, but there wasn't a real theater in town. So he took out the dry goods section and I don't know exactly how it worked out, but they redid a room large enough to hold about 50 people and painted it, got it all fixed up, and they weren't able to open it until it was 27 when they opened, 28 when they opened it. And it was a small theater. In those days it showed just silent pictures, and typical of the period you'd have a feature film and a comedy and a newsreel.
Okay.
And the cost was 35 cents for adults and 15 cents for kids.
Wish it was still that way.
It was open Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday nights. GNS Theater.
35 cents.
Well, you know, this was a long time ago.
What can we do to get the price to come back to 35 cents in this time? So I also read that they had musicians there, so they also had live entertainment there, did they?
Well, to accompany, you know, in those days when you had silence, you had to have music with it. So Charlotte was a musician, and she got a small organ, and she accompanied the film by playing on the organ. And she by that time had a little child that would sit on the bench by her, so it was a domestic scene.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting because when you think back of these cities when they first got started, it's so difficult to get your mind around what really happened, considering what's going on in our life right now. But it sounded like they had a lot of people living in Los Altos. You kind of gave me a brief number, but what do you think the real, what's your guesstimate of the population at the time?
Well, we have, of course, the census for 1920, 30, and on. But until the town was actually incorporated, it was only this small downtown area that you could say was Los Altos. The school district, which covered a much vaster area, which is pretty much what today's Los Altos is, probably, when we're talking about them first came in here, probably had 700 to 1,000 people. And then by 1930, it was probably double that. By 1940, we figured it was between 3,000 and 4,000 in the area.
Okay. Do you know what it is today? I should have known this.
20,
What's your guess?
It's 25, I think, something like that. Of course, we have Los Altos Hills.
Right.
And Los Altos Hills is very much smaller. I think maybe it's 7,000 or 8,000, but I think it's around 25 for us.
Amazing.
Well, the big push was after World War II. population exploded all down the peninsula. Los Altos was part of that. But by that time, Gregory's had moved on because Jack sold it in 1936. And since then, it's gone through a number of different changes, mostly restaurants, Chinese restaurants, almost any kind you can think of at one time or another has been there.
I've noticed. Because after I was asked to do this, I went over there to look at the building, and I remembered it being a Chinese restaurant, but when I got there, it's a different business altogether.
Yes, true.
Well, that leads me to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is, what changes have you seen and you know of that have been made to that building since you started, doing your research and work on it?
When you look at the old pictures of the building, it's really not all that different. At least on the outside, I suppose it's very much changed inside. But the exterior is, it's still pretty much the same facade. I've never sat down and looked at the changes, but my view is that it's pretty much the same. Did you see the plaque, the historic plaque on the building?
I did. I actually did. I know that our interview is on the Copeland building, but the building directly across the street from it, is that also?
Yes, that's also historical. That was the third building put up. And that housed the Altos Land Company and one of the first grocery stores. And the Altos Land Company was the real estate agent that set out the town, and of which Paul Schaup was the president.
Okay. Now, Mr. Copeland obviously had to have quite a bit of money in order to build a building like that. Did you know, or do you know anything of Mr. Copeland before he started with the building and started?
No, I don't. And apparently the Copelands didn't have any children. I know when he moved in there, he was 31, she was 28. So they were a fairly young couple. I don't know the source of his income.
Okay. And do you know at what age he passed away? Have you heard anything about him?
1940.
He passed away in 1940.
But his wife, it's kind of interesting, his wife, Laura, she, of course, had helped out running the newspaper, which had, by that time had become the Los Altos News. And in shortly after he died, she joined the staff and started being a reporter for the paper.
Oh.
So back to the newspaper business.
Good for her. I guess you have to have something to spend your time doing that you enjoy, It helps to keep you alive.
Yes.
And do you know, after they sold the business, where they moved? Did they continue to live in Los Altos? Do you know where they moved to?
They had a very interesting life. They were interested in the horses. And they bought a pasturage in Mountain View. I forget what it was called. But they developed race horses and apparently were quite successful at it. But that's kind of an iffy business, and I think in the end they probably found that it was too much. But for a while they had a very lively life with racing.
Oh, they did. Well, a lot of times when someone has done something as monumental, because back then, sounds like a lot of what he did could be considered monumental, because, he's left an indelible mark in a lot of ways, it sounds like.
Well, in a small way, yes, that's true.
Would you say that he was someone that the community loved and appreciated?
Oh, yes, I think he was very popular. As a matter of fact, he was known all around the area as the mayor of, as an honorary title, the mayor of Los Altos, because he was so popular.
Yeah, because I know, as you are aware, I'm sure, that in this day and age, people who are successful, very successful, sometimes often they get a bad rap because people don't always agree with all of the choices that they make. So I was interested in his reputation and how people viewed him.
It's first class.
He was a first-class man, yes.
Yes, to think that he came here almost as a lad, as an itinerant barber, and he worked his way up. It's quite an amazing story. He must have been an interesting person.
Yeah, you said came here. Did he come to Los Altos from somewhere, or was he in?
Are we talking?
I'm sorry, I was referring to Mr. Copeland.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I get into Gregory because
Don't
he's much
worry,
more
I was going to
interesting.
get you to him next because he sounds like another fascinating person.
Well, he is the one, but you know.
Okay, good. I'll get to him in 1 second. My last question about Mr. Copeland. I was asking was he a native as far as you can remember? Was he a native of this area, or did he move here from a neighboring city?
In the 1930 census, he's listed as an American citizen. So
Okay.
I think California is where he's from, but I don't know from where.
Okay.
That's just something we haven't researched.
Well, good. So let's get to our Englishman,
Yeah.
because I have an English upbringing myself, so
Well, there
I
you
can't
go.
wait to hear about Mr.
You've been to
Curry.
Liverpool?
I have been to Liverpool, believe it or not. I have. And so if I lived in Liverpool, I'd move to America too. And I just mean that because it's not meant to be negative, it's just that the weather is not, I did not like the weather there. But, so Mr. Gregory came here from England, and he was living in Half Moon Bay. And then he heard of this opportunity in Los Altos, and he moved over here, and it sounded like he really established himself and his family in Los Altos.
Very quickly, yeah. He's an amazing guy to get enough money to send for his family, you know.
I have to say, you don't know how large the family was, do you?
I think there were originally 12 siblings, and he brought over, I think, 8 of them.
12 siblings?
It was a big, well, you know, in those days,
Right,
big family.
exactly, yes, yes.
You know, so older brother felt responsible. He brought over that many. I know in 1930 census, there actually, by that time, there were only 8 of them living in the upstairs. His father, he by that time, of course, had married and they had a child, and then 3 of his brothers and 1 of his brother's wives. So they were all Gregory's, but only 8. Only 8.
That's a lot to bring to America. And back then you only came on ships, right?
Oh, sure, of course. Absolutely.
Pretty amazing. So, do you know what is currently in the upstairs part of the
No, that's
Copeland
an
building?
interesting question. I should have gone and looked up there. I have no idea what's up there.
Because I went over there and I looked at the building. I was allowed downstairs, but I couldn't figure out how to get upstairs, and
That's a good question. Why don't you
Okay.
check it out?
I will.
I mean,
I wish we had the answer for our viewers, though, you know. I'm sure they can go and find out as well, though, if they're interested. What ended up happening to Mr. Gregory and his family? Has he left anything behind that we may want to share with our viewers?
no, I can't, I don't know. Once he left Los Altos, I'm sure he left a lot of friends that probably came back from time to time, but I don't know.
Okay.
I've not even seen an obituary for him, so I don't know.
Okay. Hopefully he didn't go back to Liverpool, and that's why we've lost track of him.
I think it's pretty sure he didn't.
So is there anything else you would like to share that I haven't asked you about that you think our viewers might enjoy hearing about regarding the Copeland building and the businesses and Mr. Gregory?
Well, you might put the building into context in the civic and social sense by saying that the closest gathering place for people was up in North Los Altos at the San Antonio Club, which was an old institution, started in 1907. But that's more than a mile away. In downtown, there was the Shout building, but it was it was just a grocery store, and then the upstairs was rather small. It was the original grammar school. But when they built the grammar school in 1913 and people started coming in, that store became this sort of the social civic center. So it's important from that standpoint.
And what is it called, the San Antonio Club?
Yes, that's up on San Antonio Road. It's still there. It's still called that, and it looks pretty much like it did when it was built. It was built as a music and literary society, so it was they had meetings and elocution and all that sort of thing. They brought culture to North Los Altos. There's Stanford's, a lot of Stanford professors.
I'm trying to figure out where it is. I'm trying to gauge in my mind if I could follow exactly which building
You know where,
it is.
well, you know the intersection of San Antonio Road and El Camino Real?
Yes.
It's down about a quarter of a mile towards
Okay.
Los Altos.
Oh, okay.
On the east side of
Okay.
El Camino. And it's been used as a, well, kids used to dance there during World War II. There were dances held there. It was became a social part of North Los Altos. But for the center of Los Altos, at least up till mid-30s, it would have been that building, the Gregory's.
Well, it sounds to me like Los Altos back then seemed like it had a lot more going on socially than Los Altos today. I personally find Los Altos very quiet. I mean, it's beautiful, but there's no theater operating there now that you know of, do you?
No, there's no theater. There was, after World War II, of course, there was a big, fancy building, theater built. I should have mentioned that the J&S Theater went out of, they stopped when talkies became in big time in '29, they went out of business. They didn't convert to the talkies. But the theater that was built in '47 was was one of the kind of movie palaces that had all the fancy stuff, but it lasted till the 1970s, and then television did it in like it did so many small theaters.
Yeah. Do you think that the television world kind of put the shade over the theater business a little bit?
Well, I guess so. That's a big question. That's above my pay grade.
And the only reason why I asked that is because back then theater seemed so much more the choice for entertainment, and today there are more movie theaters and different television shows.
It's a different world.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yeah. I wish we still had some of that because I really enjoyed theater. Actually, growing up in theater myself, I'm an actress, so I totally can relate to that time.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm sure that in when that building was really the heart of Los Altos, that there was music. I'm sure they must have had some, but I just don't know.
Right. Well, I am so grateful that you have been so kind to answer all these questions we have had about the Copeland building and the family.
Well, I hope most of the answers are right. The historians have to be a little bit,
well,
modest, because sometimes we get new information that doesn't quite stack up with the old. To change your mind.
Really?
Well, right so.
Well, all you can do is relate it as it was told. Or where did you get most of your information?
We have the newspapers. Unfortunately, we don't have the ones that Copeland himself worked on, the ones between 23 and 28. Those have disappeared. But we have all the copies of the news, and we have all the copies of the town crier. So that's a big resource. And we have the hard copies, While it's maybe takes longer, it is a little harder on, it's so much easier to research hard copy instead of going to microfiche. The the other main source of our information, and a lot of this comes from oral histories. We have a pretty successful oral history program, and Mrs. Gregory is the source of a lot of this information because she gave us an interview back in '87 when she visited to see some old friends.
Well, thank you so very much. I've really enjoyed this, and I personally...
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. I've always loved history. So for me, this is like sitting in a history class with the most fascinating, handsome historian. Thank you so much for your time. And I really hope our viewers will enjoy this bit of information.
Well,
and maybe they'll notice the Copeland Center when they walk by now.
Maybe they
Again,
will.
thank you.
A pleasure.